Welcome to Soundside and welcome to KUOW's District Dash. I'm Libby Dankman, alongside David Hyde, KUOW politics reporter. 7 Seattle City Council races will be decided this November, and we've invited all the council candidates to answer the questions voters most want addressed. But we know that you are busy, and so we're trying to get through these answers in 30 minutes. It's a dash, and it's going to move fast. If candidates go over time for an answer, you may hear this. Or this. That's a Washington State Ferry horn. It likes us to stay on the clock. So today we're headed to District 2, which will soon stretch from Rainier Beach to Yesler Terrace, including Chinatown-International District, Mount Baker, and Beacon Hill. Welcome to the candidates vying to represent District 2. Current Councilmember Tammy Morales, running for her second term in office. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And community activist Tanya Woo. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you. Happy to be here as well.
So thanks, everybody, for coming along, and we're going to get right to the first questions. They are about sweeps. Tammy Morales, an encampment at 25th Avenue South and South McClellan Street on Beacon Hill was cleared in September after months of complaints from neighbors and a deadly shooting. You told KUOW that you do not support Mayor Harrell's approach to clearing homeless encampments. What about in a case like this?
In a case like this, if there is somebody who is committing an act of violence, then that individual needs to be arrested. But the rest of the community is not guilty of that crime. And look, this is a conversation we've been having since long before I was a council member. Sweeps don't solve the problem of homelessness. All they do is move people from one side of the street to the other or from one neighborhood to another and just make the next community mad. If we really want to solve this homelessness problem, then we need to get serious about investing in the short-term solutions that can help move people off the streets, like tiny house villages, like RV safe lots. These are things I've been advocating for and actually funding or trying to fund for the last 4 years. That's how we move people off the streets, where they have access to services, to bathrooms, to trash pickup, to kitchens. That's the short-term solution to this problem, not moving people from one side of the street to the other.
Tanya Woo, you told KUOW that you do support Mayor Harrell's approach to clearing homeless encampments. Critics point out that Seattle currently clears many encampments without the 72-hour notice period and offer of services. Some research says that this is very disruptive and increases the risk of overdose and other bad health outcomes for unhoused people. Is Seattle using no-notice sweeps too freely?
When I say I support the mayor's plan, I support his plan to do the outreach and the engagement right before the sweeps and placing people into housing and shelters, using vouchers. And so I think that outreach and engagement needs to continuously be done, regardless of whether they're being swept or not. We have to have a proactive approach compared to a reactive one. We just cannot wait for someone to die there or for horrendous crimes to happen. We have to go in making sure that we engage in building trust and relationships with people, seeing who are the people who need resources and seeing who is there for what. I know there are a lot of people who are there preying on our in-house folks. And so I think it's utmost importance to continuously do this outreach and this engagement. And that can be done with the city, it can be done with community groups like my group, the Community Watch Group. We go in encampments and we try to connect people to resources. And I think that's the most important piece that needs to be done within the city.
So I just want to follow up. So I didn't quite hear an answer. Is Seattle using no-notice sweeps too freely?
I believe they have to give notice. No notice sweeps have not been done for quite a bit. I do see notices given, and they do extend those notice periods when people have been missed. So I don't think they're being used as much as they used to be, but there is some notice.
They're actually being used much more frequently lately, and they are supposed to be giving 72 hours notice, but that is not happening, and people are being removed because they are supposedly obstructing sidewalks, which is the reason they can be moved. But it is happening far too frequently, and again, is really just contributing to the problem, because then people lose access to their social workers, they lose access to services, they lose their belongings, they are re-traumatized. So it's not a solution to the problem that we're trying to solve. And this is the challenge, that we're, really moving toward more punitive measures across the city rather than working on prevention.
Tanya, it was 30 seconds for you to respond to that.
So I think sweeping an encampment is very different than someone who has set up a tent on a sidewalk. I think that's a totally different situation. I believe encampments are much larger. I go into the encampments, and then I also see people also on sidewalks. And I think getting to know who does what and who's going where. People who are in encampments seem to have been outside for much longer periods of time. People who set up on sidewalks, I believe, just or someone who's new to the area. And so I feel like for most of the encampments I've seen, there have been notices, whether people have seen it or not. They put them up. KCRJ says that they have been out there. LEAD, REACH has been doing that work. And so I'm curious to see where these no notice sweeps are happening.
Tanya Woo, staying with you, thousands of people in our region we're just talking about don't have shelter. But King County scrapped plans to expand a 275-bed homeless shelter in Seattle's SODO neighborhood near the CID. You opposed that expansion. Tell us why.
So we're not anti-unhoused. We wanted a seat at the table. Basically, King County passed the lease back in May, did not let the community know until September for a facility that was supposed to open November, December. And so this follows a long line of historical high-impact projects being brought onto the community without community outreach or engagement, following I-5, the stadiums, streetcar, sound transit. And so this was just another project, and we were like, enough is enough. We would like respect. We would like you to allow us to have a seat at the table, allow for meaningful outreach, engagement, and conversation. We wanted a good neighbor agreement that should have been in place when the shelter opened in, I believe, 2020. And we also wanted plans regarding how we're going to bring about public safety and how we're going to bring about the encampments right outside the shelter into the shelter.
Tammy Morales, same topic. In a press release, you said you received the news that the project had been scrapped with, quote, pensiveness, and you accused, quote, bad faith political actors without ties to the CID of co-opting the narrative. Was the county's decision to scrap the project the wrong decision due to bad actors?
Well, I think a lot of things about the way that process went down was problematic. I agree with Tanya. The community was not engaged in a way they should have been. I myself didn't find out about the project until late summer, even though apparently they had these plans in place for quite some time. So the challenge is that the community needed to be engaged. And another challenge is that, as you said, we have thousands of people on our streets who need access to shelter. So we need much more shelter throughout the city, throughout King County. I don't think that all of that needs to go into the CID, and we certainly know that there are a lot of social services that are already located there, which is why they wanted to expand the shelter. But we really need to acknowledge that both things are true. Community needs to be engaged, and we need more shelter in the city. In terms of the rationale for opposing, when we met with the stranger, what this really came down to for Tanya, as she acknowledged in that meeting, was that this was the public disorder was more of a problem than whether or not the community had been engaged. And I think that's where the question of, how outside actors came into that conversation, people from Bellevue and Newcastle and from outside the community,
the dreaded
to really
seagull.
Contribute to the problem.
It's our first seagull of the day.
So was the county's decision to scrap the project the wrong one, the right one? What do you think?
I still think we need shelter. That was a place that they already owned, and we were trying to reach a compromise to understand with the community. Tanya and I had a few conversations. There was email going on trying to see if we could convene with the county to figure out a compromise. They were trying to offer several different additions. I was trying to see if maybe the community would accept a couple of the things they wanted to do. But by the time we got to trying to actually schedule that meeting, the county canceled the project.
So the wrong decision.
Sure.
Tammy, actually staying with you, does every neighborhood in District 2, including the CID, need more shelter space and more low-barrier permanent supportive housing?
Does every neighborhood? There's 20 neighborhoods in the South End. I don't think every neighborhood needs to have one, but I do believe that every district should have them. And in District 2, we already have several. We have permanent supportive housing, and I think it's important. Obviously, we have almost 50,000 homeless people in King County. We only have about 6,000 shelter beds. So even if everybody said yes to a place to go, which is only for one night. The next morning, they're back on the street. There's still 42,000 people with no place to go. So we need to expand and accelerate our production of permanent supportive housing. And I do think that every part of the city needs to share in that responsibility.
Tanya, same question. Does every neighborhood in District 2 need more shelter space, more low-barrier permanent supportive housing?
I would like to address something that Councilmember Morales said earlier. So basically, I think what was the most important issue regarding the shelter expansion and community trying to amplify its voices was that this was our narrative, and we were very unhappy with public officials taking our narrative and twisting it. So basically, I want the strangers to release that interview footage that they were willing to prove to the point that it is untrue that there were not external factors. What we were fighting for is a seat at the table and why I am running. We were a community in crisis, and we reached out to elected officials, and Councilmember Morales did not call until about a week before the shelter was canceled.
That's the fairy horn. Thank you. Moving on to the issue of displacement. Councilmember Morales, neighborhoods like Rainier Beach and Beacon Hill are seeing accelerating gentrification. Recently, Councilmember Shama Sawant sponsored a rent control bill. Do you support her rent control proposal as a means of stopping displacement?
Well, I do support the idea of rent control. We know that for every $100 that rent goes up in the city, more people get evicted because they can't afford it. And let's be real, like the city is 20% more expensive than it has been in the last several years. Lots of people can't afford to stay, and many people are losing their homes because they can't afford the dramatic rent increases in the city. So I do think that is something we need to consider. I think that is a way for us to ensure more permanent affordability in the city so people stop getting pushed out, and particularly for folks in District 2, even in District 3, communities of color where we have lost so much of the rich heritage of the communities because folks can't afford to be here anymore. We really have to do everything we can, and rent control is one option. Permanently affordable housing, like the social housing that we recently passed in this city, is another option, and I'm really excited to be supporting that.
Tanya Woo, same question. Is rent control the right answer in Seattle to stop displacement?
It depends on your definition and the terms of rent control. My family has workforce housing. I believe that's a great way. That only charges people a percentage of their income, so no one's forced to pay rent they cannot afford. We need more affordable housing like that in the district. We need to build more, but we also need to allow for more home ownership, because I think that's the best way to be able to build generational wealth that's very lacking in our district. And so in one form or another, rent control, depending on how that's laid out, but we just need more housing. And my opponent voted against building more housing within the downtown core, even though the bill did pass. And so I was wondering, how are you serious about building more housing when you are stopping these opportunities to be able to do that in the downtown core and reactivate that area?
30-second response.
Sure. The bill I voted against was for luxury market rate apartments. So let's be clear about that. The reason I voted against it is because though it would have contributed to our mandatory housing affordability, which creates a pot of money for affordable housing, it would have created one new unit a year for 20 years. That's not the kind of affordable housing pace of development that we need. I voted against that because I think it is a handoff to private property owners, and we get nothing in return.
Tanya, just quickly before we move on, so if you're not 100% behind Shama Sawant's proposal, is there a type of rent control that you would support?
I was not for Councilmember Sawant's particular proposal because it did not allow for workforce housing, basically. It would really... we would have to change our whole funding model to make that work. And so we need to be able to look at rent control that includes affordable housing such as that, and also include having more voices at the table going forward.
And I just want to double check, you said you were for or against Shama Sawant's proposal?
I'm for the idea of rent control. I don't know if her particular proposal is the way to go about it, but I absolutely support the idea.
All right. Did you vote for it?
I'm sure I did vote for it.
All right, that brings us to the luxurious intermission portion. It's going to be not that long, but take your time here. So the question is, If you have a free afternoon in District 2, where's your favorite place to kill time?
Free afternoon District 2. I don't have any of those lately, but
mythical free afternoon.
Yeah, the hypothetical free afternoon. I love going to Seward Park, and I live fairly close to Third Place Books, and I love hanging out in bookstores. So
I love spending time outdoors, walking around Columbia City, Othello Park, Kings Plaza. There's so much great food there. You just pick something up and walk around.
All right. We've got questions about businesses, small businesses. Tanya, let's start with you. 2 beloved stores are closing in District 2, and people are upset. McPherson's fruit stand on Beacon Hill, the owner's citing a number of things, including the cost of doing business as a factor, and Mutual Fish on Rainier Ave. Mutual Fish cited a number of factors as well, including zoning changes and crime. And in the Seattle Times write-up, they found a shopper inside Mutual Fish who said, the city needs to look at what its vision is for small businesses. And so the question is, what are 1 or 2 things that you think the city should be doing differently in the future to help protect small businesses?
Yes, as a small business owner, I can think of many things that the city could be doing differently to help our small businesses. The last 4 years have not been great coming out of the pandemic, especially for businesses here in District 2. And so especially the thing that I remember most recently is the grants, the government grants that were given. Sometimes the process to acquire these grants were arduous, and some businesses were not able to do it because of language barriers or not having all the paperwork that was needed to be submitted. So how do we expand those grant programs to not only include like nonprofits, but also businesses that may not have had been open for that much longer, who had just opened? Another thing is, public safety is a big concern, number 1 concern in the district that I've been hearing. And the cost of doing business is too high. We have broken windows, graffiti. Our employees do not feel safe coming to and from these businesses. And security costs are enormous. So how do we work together to build back public safety?
Great. And Tammy Morales, you've been in office since 2020. What would you want to do differently moving forward to help small businesses survive?
Sure, that's a great question. 3 things come to mind immediately. The first is commercial rent control. So this was something that we were able to do during the pandemic, really helped keep our small businesses from getting evicted. So we are working on legislation to try to do that next year. And the other thing is commercial ownership. So we are working with the Department of Neighborhoods, with the Office of Economic Development, and with lots of particularly Black business owners, finance folks, commercial real estate people, to try to figure out how to create the opportunity for businesses to buy property rather than lease. So increasing commercial affordability so that they can buy and own their properties instead of being tenants and getting pushed out. And then the other thing I'll say is that we do need a lot more work, and our Office of Economic Development is trying to pull together kind of a business navigator system so that our small businesses, particularly those who don't speak English as a first language, can get more assistance understanding lease agreements, understanding access to capital, understanding some of the, like back office work that needs to happen to get businesses going.
That's Seward Park Seagull right there, moving us along. Let's talk about public safety. Seattle is experiencing a spike in violent crime. Councilmember Morales, you have said that our neighborhoods will be safe when our neighbors are thriving. However, investments in housing, mental health care, addiction support, and other programs take time. What is the more immediate short-term solution for communities that currently feel unsafe?
Sure. Well, we need, first of all, a police department that will respond. I think all of us on council have heard from our neighbors, from our small businesses, from, individuals that when the department is called, they don't show up. So I would like to understand what's going on there. And it's not the staffing issue, so I'm sure we'll get to that. So what we also need to do, though, is make sure that we are addressing some of the the immediate safety plan. So we have a lot of organizations, for example, that work on violence interruption, that work on victim support when an event has happened, that work on diversion. And we need to be scaling up all of those organizations and that ability for people to intervene and to build relationship with folks in the community. So there's a lot of work that we need to be doing, that we are doing and have been funding, but we really need to scale it up. And the other thing I'll say is that, again, our Office of Economic Development and our Department of Neighborhoods are working to support small businesses and working to make sure that they get access to the services and the support they need when something is happening. So, yeah.
Ferry's coming in. Candidate Tanya Woo, you have emphasized the need to fully staff the police department. But there is a concern in your district about over-policing and mass incarceration. As a council member, how would you mitigate the potentially harmful effects policing can have on communities of color?
Yes, holding the police department accountable, I think, is going to be of utmost importance. Making sure that there is a civility oversight to be able to have say in who the captain, lieutenants, who are within the police department, as well as, the officers who are engaged in problematic behaviors have to be removed. We cannot stand for that. And so, but right now, I think for short-term solutions, police have to be part of the solution, and we have to learn from our past and take these lessons to be able to apply them for a future. Like, I would have voted yes in favor of the drug ordinance, because right now we have to fall within state law, and having that treatment and diversion in place is really important, and making sure that that's the first thing that people are going towards versus going straight into jail, which is what the ordinance originally intended. Councilmember Morales has voted to defund police, even though that did not happen.
That is not true. Sorry, you said I couldn't do that.
We're going to get 30 seconds, just to take back 10 seconds of your time. Tanya.
So yes, so voted to defund police, even though that did not happen because she was on the losing end of those votes. What happened was the police department was demoralized, and we have 600 officers leave the force. And so we are
all right, we're going to give you 30 seconds to respond, council member, and then we'll go back to you, Tanya Woo.
Yes, so apologies. So the vote was not on defunding the police. The vote was on abrogating positions, removing funding from unstaffed positions that have been vacant for some time, and moving it into other community safety measures. That was the vote. That is what my opponent agreed to. She would have also supported on a different podcast. And so, this seems not to be a dispute between the two of us. If there are unfilled positions and that money can be used for different safety measures, then that's what we should be doing. Right now the department is fully funded. Their staffing plan is fully funded, and that's what we did.
Tanya Woo.
Yes. So there were definitely many votes. So I think Councilmember Morales is referring to the latest votes. But if you go back to, was it 2020, 2021, please check the record that Morales did vote in the losing end of defunding the police, of removing money from the police department. And so I don't remember the exact name or number of the ordinance, but I implore people to please check the record.
All right. You mentioned the drug ordinance that you supported. You went to council, urged Councilmember Morales and others to vote for it. Part of the law would allow the city attorney to prosecute people for public drug use and possession. Part of the intent of the law, at least, is to encourage people to be able to get into treatment. But there's no new funding for treatment in the new drug law. Why support it without the funding piece? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes. So if the funding is not there, let's put it in there for city council. Why don't we amend it to make sure the funding is there and that treatment and diversion is the first thing that we go to? And I believe that's the power of being on city council.
All right. Tammy Morales, for you, you voted against the new drug ordinance, saying it wouldn't help people who are struggling with addiction, but there was another piece of the law which is about protecting the public. So I wanted to ask you about that part of it. Do you agree with Mayor Harrell that Seattle police should consider arresting someone who's smoking fentanyl outside a school or at a crowded bus stop? What do you think, yes or no?
So this is a public health problem, and it needs a public health solution. Neither the bill nor the mayor's budget proposal included funding for diversion or treatment, both of which he suggested would be offered in his proposal, and neither were. All this bill does is expand the discretion for police to arrest people who are suffering from addiction. And unless somebody, including my opponent, can point me to the data that says jailing people helps their addiction problem, I'm going to continue to support solutions that actually work. So, this is really a question of intent. And it is clear to me that the intent of this legislation was not to actually help people solve the problem of their addiction. The intent of this legislation, the only problem it solves is to, keep people from having to see poverty, from allowing them to call the police when they see something that they don't like, regardless of what the location is. That's the only outcome of this bill.
So on that other piece of preventing harm to the public, I think harm was the word that Harold used in his executive order, where he mentioned a couple of sensitive locations outside a school, crowded bus stop, suggesting that the police could consider arresting somebody there. No.
They can consider arresting somebody anywhere. It gives them that discretion. So
without the law.
That is the intent of the law. So the
but do you
threat to
support
harm
that?
to others.
Would you want to see officers do that? Yes or no?
It is a public health crisis. Arresting them doesn't solve the problem for anybody.
Great.
So this is state law, and we have to follow state law. But this ordinance allowed for that treatment and diversion to take place versus going straight to arrest. That pre-diversion, pre-arrest, I think is necessary. You go to 12th and Jackson, and you see Summit Sierra High School right there. 150 people doing drugs while kids are trying to learn. And we need more social workers, we need more case managers out there, but we have to do something, because hearing the stories from the children in that area, it's not a great learning environment. And so we just cannot hard no these tough conversations. We have to have them, we have to talk about them, and we have to do something. People are dying out there.
We're rolling into our lightning round here, candidates. These are one-word answers to questions, and we're going to have a couple minutes to get through as many as possible here. So try to keep your answer to one word. Starting out with a tough one, and Tammy Morales, will start with you, and then go to Tanya Woo. Pho Bok or Island Soul?
Island Soul.
Tanya?
I can't.
That's a non-answer?
Yes.
For the record, non-answer between Pho Bok and Island Soul. We already sort of covered this, but favorite park in District 2, Tammy Morales?
Seward Park.
Tanya?
Pritchard Beach.
Okay, this one is for both of you. Did you vote in the 2021 Seattle mayor's race?
Yes.
I need a check. I don't know.
If you did, who did you vote for?
Lorena.
Do you support expanding the use of automated enforcement cameras in District 2? These are traffic enforcement cameras to help protect pedestrians. Tanya, let's start with you.
Yes.
Yes.
Would you support closing Lake Washington Boulevard for bike and pedestrian use only, Councilmember?
For bike and pedestrian only, no.
Tanya?
Depends on... No.
What about making Lake Washington Boulevard one direction and increasing the bike and pedestrian areas on Lake Washington Boulevard?
Sure.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
For Lake Washington Boulevard, some advocates want to completely close it. Some are pushing for making it one direction and making the rest bike and pedestrian access. You don't support the idea of completely closing it, but what about making it one direction and expanding bike and pedestrian access?
No.
Seattle's forecasting a big budget deficit starting in 2025. A work group recently suggested new tax ideas to fill the gap. Yes or no, would you be likely to support a high pay CEO ratio tax? So that's for CEOs that make a huge amount more comparative to their average employee.
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
This is a proposed progressive tax that would tax a company when there's a high net worth CEO that makes a lot, huge ratio amount more than their average employee.
Yes.
A city inheritance tax.
Yes.
No.
What about congestion tax for roads and traffic? Congestion pricing?
No.
If it's not regressive for workers who need their cars.
All right. Thank you to both of our candidates for going through our lightning round. We're going to move on to closing statements now. We did flip a coin ahead of this. And Tammy Morales, you go first on your 1 minute closing statement.
1 minute. Okay, well, thank you for having us. I am excited to be seeking re-election for this term. I will say that there is a lot of good work that we have done in my office for the last 4 years, and I'm really proud of that work, whether it is advocating and funding community-led development, funding safety projects, road safety, bike safety projects in the South End where we don't have a lot of sidewalks, or working with our young people, supporting them with mental health services, with increased access to community safety programs in their schools. There's a lot of work that we've been doing to make sure that we are building a Seattle that is safe for people to navigate their communities, where we are pushing for affordability and really trying to create resilient, healthy neighborhoods. I'm proud to be endorsed by over a dozen labor organizations, environmental organizations, Planned Parenthood, Democratic organizations, and King County Councilmember Zahalai, and I look forward to continuing to support and serve the people of District 2.
Tanya Woo, you get the last word.
I am a person of action. When I saw there was a need for affordable housing, I went and built the Louisa Hotel for affordable housing, workforce apartments. When I saw there was a need for public safety, I started an alternative to public safety group that also works with our first responders. And so I've done that for 3 neighborhoods. I would like to do that for the entire city. We need action. We need to see results. These last 4 years have been really tough on our small businesses, on many of our community members, our students especially. And crime is up. Our homicide rate has surpassed what it was last year. And we really need problem solving and results versus ideological debates. We need to have these tough conversations. We need to work together and build bridges and build trust in our community, not only with government, but also with our Seattle Police Department, and trying to do that extra outreach and engagement to our communities of color. There's so much we need to do and so many ideas that have to happen for us to get to a place that we know we could have. And I'm really excited to be able to get engaged with communities, and together we could work towards solutions to many of the issues that we're seeing today.
Thank you to Tanya Woo, candidate for District 2, Seattle City Council, and Councilmember Tammy Morales. And you can always hear all of our District Dashes over on the Soundside podcast. And please look for David Hyde's reporting on KUOW.org. For David Hyde, I'm Libby Dankman. Happy voting, everybody.